SAS welcomes you to a SAS Global Forum Live Report. Live from the Moscone Center in San Francisco, here's your host, Karen Reed.
Our next guests are no strangers to SAS. Tom Davenport is an author and consultant. He is a world-renowned thought leader who has helped hundreds of companies revitalize their management practices, especially in the area of analytics. He's also the president's distinguished professor of management and information technology at Babson College and a visiting professor at the Harvard School of Business. Jill Dyche is the Vice President of Best Practices at SAS. Among her many responsibilities, Jill tackles industry education, key client strategies, and market analysis in the areas of data governance, business intelligence, master data management, and customer relationship management. Welcome, Tom and Jill. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Karen. Good to be here.
Nice to have you back. Tom, let me begin with you. Can you tell us about the research study you recently completed? And who did you interview, and what were you hoping to find out?
Well, a lot of the big data work has been in small companies, startups, online firms, here in the Bay Area, and we wanted to find out what was really happening in the large, more traditional companies. So we interviewed 20 of them, each of which had a big data initiative underway. We talked to basically the people who were managing them, vice presidents and above, and turned out they were doing a lot, and I think a very different kind of picture of what big data is about than we saw. I did another study with SAS looking at data scientists, and they were very isolated and didn't have to reconcile big data with everything else that was going on. This is a very different environment.
That's very interesting. Now, when companies speak of big data, are they simply focusing on the volume of data or the variety of data they have? What do you think?
Well, the variety is more of a challenge for them. Volume, I think, not so much of a problem for the most part. Maybe the computer chews at it for a little bit longer, but the variety, the lack of structure seems to be much more of an issue in addressing big data and doing something useful with it than the volume does. Even though the name big suggests it's really all about volume.
Right, exactly. Well, we've all seen a huge uptick in the unstructured data in organizations. What impact is that having?
Well, people want to analyze it. They want to add it to the decisions that they're already making. We talked to a health insurance company that is trying to figure out, well, can we take the call center conversations we have, turn that into text, analyze the text, see if customers are unhappy and ready to leave us so we can intervene and do something to make them happy. So that's, attrition is an issue that people have been looking at for a long time with analytics, but this is a new way of addressing it with that unstructured data.
In your study, you talk about what even a very small gain in efficiency can mean to a company. I believe you had an example on fuel savings with GE aircraft.
Yeah, GE is really putting a huge amount of money and effort into big data, and they've established a center for it here in the Bay Area, hiring hundreds of data scientists, and their focus is on things that spin, like jet engines and gas turbines and so on, putting sensors on the blades and so on. And they figure that with a 1% savings in sort of fuel consumption, it's something like $6 billion a year for airlines, more for power companies because the gas turbines for energy generation are running all the time. So it adds, they're not sure exactly. They might be able to get more than 1%, but that alone makes it worth doing.
Yeah, you bet. Those are big numbers. Jill, what are some of the best practices that you've discovered through your research?
Since you are the head of best practices.
Yeah, it's a super app. Thank you, Karen. Well, we're actually seeing three different things. The first one is that these big companies that we interviewed are using the technologies they're using because those technologies are optimized around what they're doing. So they're leaving their data warehouse in place, they're leveraging their analytics software, and they're bringing in new big data technologies like Hadoop. So, the first thing is optimizing their technology portfolios around big data. The second thing we're seeing is they're starting to get serious about governing and managing their data. And big data, as we talked about this morning, is inviting a new set of conversations around data governance and the need for it. And it's really the planet's aligning around all these new types of data, as Tom mentioned. And then the third thing I think is the executive mindset around fact-based decision-making is changing. It's like we've made these investments. We're about to make some more investments, not only in technology, but in skills, in organizational changes. We need to be serious about our business processes supporting fact-based decision-making. And so we're seeing not only technology changes and process changes, but we're seeing culture changes as well.
You bet. Jill, we've seen the price of data storage come down tremendously in the past couple of years. What are some current estimates on the cost of data storage using different systems, like traditional relational database, data appliance, Hadoop cluster, as you mentioned, and what impact are these lower prices having?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as soon as I quote the numbers, they're going to get lower. So rather than quoting the numbers, I mean, essentially we're seeing a tenth of the investment of traditional relational technologies. And so what that means is that the cost to entry is a lot lower than ever before. So we're actually seeing big data start to get talked about in the context of small and medium-sized businesses, as well as the big companies that Tom and I talked to. Clearly, the big companies are the early adopters, and in a lot of ways, they're setting the stage for those smaller companies to get ready to invest. And by that time, they'll have the use cases necessary to understand what those investments are about.
Great. So, what benefits are companies gaining from the time savings realized through these greater efficiencies in managing and analyzing data? What are you seeing?
So, really, two general scenarios. There's a ton of different use cases, but we're finding that in the case of some of the companies that we talk to, a lot of them are doing brand new things with big data that they could never do before. Tom mentioned the text analytics. We're looking at sentiment analysis. We're looking at, transponder data in trucks. We talked to UPS, for instance. And so a lot of new data types enabling faster decision-making, untraditional decision-making. But we're also seeing companies do what they're already doing a lot faster. So as companies approach big data, there's this assumption that, wow, there's all this new data. I've got to do all these new things. Actually, you can accelerate some of your existing business processes with big data technologies. We talked to GE, and they were actually accelerating all of their data transformations, getting rid of a lot of their ETL code, and instead using Hadoop to accelerate a lot of what they were already doing, and seeing tremendous economies of scale and efficiencies. So that's a great story right there.
Absolutely. Tom, you reported on something that I found really interesting. That's how telecom companies are using location data and selling services based on that data. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's an example of one of the coolest things organizations are doing with big data. It's new products and services, not just existing decisions. And so Verizon, one of the companies that we interviewed, has a business unit where they basically can gather data on how many cars are driving past a particular location. Maybe you're thinking about putting a billboard there. Maybe you want to put a bank branch there or something like that, because cell phones give out their location information. You can know exactly how much traffic there is. And Sprint is doing it too. Some other companies globally are doing it. And I think it's a huge potential set of services about where do people go in this world? And those companies know about as well as anybody now.
Absolutely. So how can internal business decisions use big data to support these small data analytics decisions? What do you think, Tom?
Well, what we found is the two are really getting mixed, that previous decisions made with small data are being augmented with big data, whether it's social, whether it's more data from customer interactions that we could never really capture before, just make those decisions much better and more accurately. So it's a pretty blended kind of activity in order to raise the predictive power of a particular model.
Well, how are companies monitoring the customer journey through their multi-channel relationships with the customers?
Well, most of the organizations we found doing this were banks, all the retail banks, but I think you'll see it in other companies as well. We all do this. We have a problem with the ATM system, so what do? We call a call center, maybe we go online. We'll do anything to get our money, short of robbing the bank. And so banks are increasingly realizing that in order to understand how customers are progressing through their system, they need to connect all these diverse channels and figure out how many first tried here and then went here and then went here, and start segmenting. The frustrated call center person, for example, who didn't get the answer there and went elsewhere, that cost them a lot of money to use multiple channels, and they'd just like to know how often does it happen. That customer might end up leaving them if they don't address it.
Absolutely.
Well, and one of the other things we found in terms of the customer journey is that the more information across channel behaviors a company has about its customers, the more relevant that those conversations can be with those customers. So the more relevant the campaigns and the outreach. And so traditionally we've seen companies and their marketing be only as valid as the rich data they have about a customer. With big data technologies, they can further enrich their data with other data types. For instance, social media interactions, weblogs, location information, geospatial information, and that enriches their knowledge about customer behaviors and preferences even more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how is data visualization helping business practitioners, those without this deep knowledge analytics, better understand their data? What do you think, Jill?
So we're finding that as conversant as executives are with spreadsheets right now, the need to communicate data visually, it's how we think, right? So there's a new democratization of analytics through these very easy to use, intuitive visualization tools. And so all of a sudden the product of a lot of, what Tom's data scientist friends are doing can be democratized across the organization, and it's not specific to a particular individual or a data savvy group of people anymore.
Democratization of data.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm going to use that.
Not easy to say.
It's not, but I did it okay this time around.
Well.
Are companies adjusting their organization structures and creating big data departments to handle big data? What do you think, Tom?
No. Next question.
But
No.
should they?
No, I think they're doing what we think makes sense, which is that they're sort of adding that capability into their existing organizational structures. They're trying to create some more skills to address big data, but they're not saying this is a separate thing, because it really, if you're trying to use big data to increase the predictive power of an existing model or decision, it doesn't make any sense to have it be in a separate department. So coexistence, not rip and replace, was our kind of buzzword for that.
That's reality.
Well, Jill, how do business and IT see data management capabilities differently?
Yeah, so it's interesting because the business has been unwittingly pushing for data management. We actually, that we need the single view of fill in the blank, customer, product, branch. But increasingly, IT is putting the mechanics around data management. And so, the question we ask our customers all the time is, if you had a clear data governance plan, if you understood how to make policies on your data, what would be your capabilities of executing on those policies? So IT actually has a new set of conversations around the technologies, the metadata, the data quality, the data profiling that needs to happen in order to make this data sustainable and meaningful over time.
Tom, are business executives only intrigued by the hope of cost savings and revenue generation, or are any beginning to see more lasting benefits for analytics in their organization?
Well, we didn't find a lot of companies had done serious return on investment analyses at this point. The only ones who really had were just focused on the cost savings from putting in Hadoop instead of a traditional data warehouse or something, and it's probably a tough comparison to make anyway, because you don't have some of the data management capabilities with Hadoop, security, reliability, backup, etc. So I think it's going to be a while before they have a really good sense of what's the return from the more ambitious things, better decisions and new products and services. Those are hard to justify or hard to measure anyway. So I'm not holding my breath.
You've interviewed companies on how they introduce big data technologies. What have you learned, and what advice can you offer for our viewers? Either one of you can take a crack at that.
Go ahead.
View it as an augmentation of your existing capabilities, not something entirely new. Get ready for the fact that you were going to have a lot more technology options for kind of storing and managing and processing data than you had in the past, which is going to complexify your life a bit. This is a pretty important resource when you combine all these different types of data. So start thinking about, do I have a C-level person who's really accountable for doing all of this? Start adding some data science capabilities to your mix of traditional analysts. I think, those kinds of things we think really denote a new era of thinking about analytics.
Jill, you talk about a move from Analytics 2.0 to 3.0. How would you describe Analytics 3.0, and what are some of its attributes?
Well, actually, that's a term that Tom came up with, so I'll let him do that.
You don't want anything to do with it.
Well, no,
You're not taking ownership.
I'm happy to support the theory here.
Well, it just appeared to us that Analytics 1.0, traditional analytics, small data, although nobody calls it that. Analytics 2.0, big data, but it's kind of standalone, typically in these online firms and startups. Analytics 3.0 is the mix of all of this. How big companies are dealing with it is the intersection of traditional analytics and big data, and it has some of those attributes I was mentioning earlier, multiple data types, mixing in data science skills with everything else, a lot of new technology choices. It really is, I think, a new era for how we think about managing analytics within organizations, and it starts to suggest, I think, a set of actions that companies need to take if they're going to be successful in this new era.
Well, and back to your prior question as well, I think they tie in really nicely because executives are starting to see the benefits of doing more data discovery, more exploration than they've done before, because now the technologies are optimized to do that, and it's much more cost effective than it ever was before. So the more data we have, the more we can go to these low hypothesis or no hypothesis analytics and look for patterns we didn't even know existed before. So I think that could be a really nice story in the Analytics 3.0 message.
So Jill had a vision of this back in 2000, but it's only being fully implemented now. She had a slide, she pulled out a slide she'd done in 2000 that foresaw all of these things.
Yeah,
Nostradamus.
Exactly, yeah.
When's the end of the world will be when? Okay.
I'm waiting to figure out what's going to happen in 2026 now, since we're so far ahead.
We'll be talking about Analytics 4.0.
That's right. So where can our viewers today learn more about your research study and the work that you've done together? Tom, Joe, what do you think?
So actually, the people who were here at SAS Global Forum will be getting an email from SAS with a web link to download the paper. Perfect. And I'm sure people who are watching us today will also, by that time, have the web link as well.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a really interesting and enlightening discussion. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Great. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Karen.